At 8,700 meters, your brain is operating on roughly 30% of its normal oxygen supply. At that altitude, you cannot reliably assess your own condition. The earliest signs of severe altitude sickness, confusion, and poor coordination are indistinguishable from how everyone feels. The climber who most needs to turn back is often the least capable of knowing it. Now consider the structure around them. A client may have paid $65,000 for the climb. A guide's reputation is built on getting that client to the summit. In a competitive market, turning people back carries a cost, while delivering the summit builds demand. So, at the exact moment your judgment begins to fail, the person responsible for your safety has a reason to keep you moving upward. That is not a flaw in the system. It is how the system is designed to function. And to understand what that leads to, you have to follow what happens when every part of that system behaves exactly as intended. Subscribe and hit the bell. This is the forensic truth behind the world's deadliest mountain. Commercial Everest guiding didn't exist before 1992. Rob Hall and Scott Fisher built it from scratch, charging wealthy clients to be guided up the world's highest mountain. The model worked immediately. Hall guided 6 clients to the summit in his first commercial season. By 1996, his company, Adventure Consultants, was charging $65,000 per client and running a waiting list. Fisher's company, Mountain Madness, was right behind him. What they'd created wasn't just a guiding service. It was a product with a measurable performance metric, and that metric was the summit success rate. Go to Alpine Ascents International's website right now and look at their Everest page. You'll find a year-by-year record of their expeditions. The entries read like this: 2024, 100% summit success. 2018, 100% summit success, 19 team members. That phrase, 100%, appears multiple times across recent seasons. It's the most prominent number on the page. It's also by design the most dangerous promise in mountaineering. Here's the contradiction the industry has never resolved. A company advertising 100% summit success has made an implicit commitment to every future client that it won't turn them back. But safety on Everest requires turning clients back regularly because conditions demand it regularly. You can't hold a perfect success streak and also maintain a genuine turnaround culture. Every time conditions require someone to stop, the streak ends. So every guide on every summit day is carrying that streak like a weight. Now, walk through every person in the system and ask the same question. Who has both the power and the incentive to say stop? The client has paid anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000 in fees alone. That's before flights, gear, training, and 18 months of their life. By the time they're at 8,000 meters, stopping doesn't feel like a safety decision. It feels like destroying everything they've built toward. The client has the power to turn around. They have almost no incentive to use it. The lead guide earns a summit bonus when clients summit. Their reputation in a competitive market is built on delivery. A guide known for turning clients back has a harder time attracting future clients than one known for getting people to the top. The lead guide has formal authority to abort the climb. The business model punishes them for using it. The Summit Sherpa earns a bonus of $250 to $500 when a client summits, on top of tips that can reach $5,000 per expedition. At budget operators, Sherpas have described explicit pressure not to abort. The Sherpa has practical control over the rope and can physically stop movement. Their income depends on not doing that. The operator back at base camp issues go and no-go decisions by radio. They're the furthest from the physical reality on the mountain and the most insulated from its consequences. Their entire business depends on the summit rate holding. They benefit from every summit that happens and suffer reputationally from every one that doesn't. Then there's Nepal's government, which issued 421 foreign climbing permits in 2024 at $11,000 each. It has no operational presence above base camp. It cannot and does not make real-time turnaround calls. It earns more when more permits are issued and has no structural stake in what happens after the permit is sold. Alan Arnett, the most rigorous independent tracker of Everest fatality data, found that 23 of 26 Everest deaths in 2023 and 2024 occurred on expeditions at or below the median price point. That's not coincidence. That's the arithmetic of a market where cutting costs means cutting the margins that make turnarounds possible. Every actor in the system pursues their own rational interest. The aggregate result is preventable death. The incentive structure explains the pattern. The case studies show what the pattern looks like when it kills people. 3 incidents, spread across 23 years, each with different weather, different climbers, different operators. The same structural failure running through all of them. May 10th, 1996. Rob Hall had a rule. 2 in the afternoon was the turnaround time, no exceptions, and he'd enforced it on prior expeditions and told every client about it before the climb began. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the one hard boundary between a safe descent and a race against darkness at 8,000 meters. That day, 5 of his 8 clients turned back on their own before noon. They had internalized the protocol and applied it without being told. They're alive because of it. Doug Hansen didn't turn back. Hansen had failed to summit the previous year, on a Hall expedition. He'd worked overtime as a postal worker to fund a second attempt. Hall had been with him on that failed climb. By multiple accounts, Hall had made something close to a personal promise to get Hansen to the top. By 2:30 in the afternoon, half an hour past the agreed turnaround, Hall was still at the summit waiting for Hansen, who was below him on the final section. Ong Dorje Sherpa found Hansen above the Hillary step at approximately 3 in the afternoon, ordered him to descend, and Hansen shook his head and pointed upward. Hall sent the Sherpa down to help other clients and stayed. Hansen summited at 4:30. He should have been at Camp 4 2 hours earlier. He was exhausted, nearly out of oxygen, and descending in deteriorating weather. Hall stayed with him. The storm arrived. Both died. The turnaround rule worked for the 5 clients who applied it. It failed for the client most emotionally invested in the summit because the commercial relationship had created a personal debt that Hall couldn't bring himself to break. The safety protocol was advisory. The emotional obligation felt mandatory. 10 years later, a different kind of failure. David Sharp was 34, a British climber on his 3rd Everest attempt. He was climbing without a Sherpa, without a radio, with 2 bottles of supplemental oxygen, roughly half the recommended amount. His operator provided base camp logistics and nothing else. Above Camp 1, Sharp was entirely on his own. He was found alive in Green Boots Cave at approximately 8,500 meters in the early hours of May 15, 2006. Immobile, severely frostbitten, unable to move. Over the following hours, approximately 40 climbers passed him. Some checked on him. Most assumed he was already beyond help, or that someone else would make the call. Mark Inglis, a New Zealand climber, radioed expedition manager Russell Bryce. Bryce's assessment came back over the radio. Sharp had been without oxygen too long. Nothing could be done. Inglis continued to the summit. Sharp died. The ethical question that followed was whether 40 climbers should have passed a dying man. The structural question is more important. Why was there nobody with a defined obligation to Sharp above base camp? His permit gave him the right to climb. His base camp contract gave him logistics support at altitude. Neither created any entity with responsibility for his welfare at 8,500 meters. He wasn't fully guided. He wasn't truly self-sufficient. He fell through the gap between those 2 models, and the gap killed him. Then, 2019. Nirmal Purja's photograph went around the world. 320 people in a single file line at the Hillary step. The spring weather window was narrow. Sustained winds over 60 miles per hour were forecast from May 24th onward. Every operator with clients moved their summit attempts to May 22nd and 23rd. With 381 permits issued, that meant hundreds of climbers hitting the same bottleneck simultaneously. Climbers waited over 2 hours at the Hillary step. Some ran out of oxygen standing in line. Extended exposure at 8,700 meters accelerated altitude sickness. 11 people died that season. No operator told their clients to skip the window. No coordination mechanism existed between operators. No authority could enforce a voluntary delay. Nepal's Department of Tourism, which had collected approximately $4.2 million in permit revenue that season, called suggestions that overcrowding contributed to the deaths baseless. Not bad luck, not weather. The same structural pressure, a different angle, the same outcome. The cases explain what happens. The psychology explains why even people who understand the risk still don't stop. Above 8,000 meters, the brain is running on roughly one-third of its normal oxygen supply. Decision-making is impaired, risk assessment is impaired, self-perception is impaired. The specific cruelty of this is that the symptoms of severe altitude sickness include confusion and loss of coordination, which means a climber experiencing early cerebral edema may be genuinely unable to recognize their own deterioration. The climber most in need of being turned back is often the one least capable of knowing it. Lay that biological reality on top of the financial one. The average Everest expedition costs between $30,000 and $100,000 in permit fees alone, before flights, gear, and months of training. By the time a client is standing at 8,700 meters, they have not made a rational calculation. They have arrived at the endpoint of a 2-year commitment that consumed their savings, their vacation time, and their identity. Turning back doesn't feel like surviving. It feels like erasing everything. D. Christopher Case studied the 1996 disaster, specifically through the lens of what he called destructive goal pursuit, the phenomenon where groups continue toward a goal past the point where the evidence says it cannot be safely reached. His finding was precise. The greater the insecurity a group feels about achieving the goal, the harder they try. On Everest, that means the clients most psychologically vulnerable to summit fever are exactly the clients with the most to prove. First-timers, people who failed before, people chasing a record. These are also, structurally, the clients most likely to resist a turnaround, and most likely to be on budget expeditions, where the guide has the least authority to force one. The visibility problem compounds all of it. When the summit is 50 to 100 meters above you, you can see it. Not abstractly, not on a map. You can see it with your eyes. Being turned back at that distance feels categorically different from being turned back 500 meters below, even when the safety arithmetic is identical. The ratchet effect is structural to the route. Every additional step increases the psychological cost of stopping, which makes stopping less likely, which pushes the climber further into conditions where stopping becomes necessary. Social pressure has made this worse in the past decade. Everest clients are frequently executives, professionals, or people who have told thousands of followers they are attempting the summit. Turning back is public, searchable, and permanent. It will be there when anyone looks. The asymmetry between stopping and continuing is psychologically real, even when it is obviously, factually wrong. Ed Viesturs climbed all 14 8,000ers without supplemental oxygen and turned back multiple times within sight of Everest's summit. His framework was simple. Getting to the summit is optional, getting down is mandatory. That line has been cited and admired in mountaineering culture for 30 years. It has not changed how commercial operators market their expeditions, because the business model rewards the summit and cannot systematically penalize the failure to get back down. Nepal introduced a guide mandate in 2025. It requires that all Everest clients climb with a guide. What it doesn't require is any minimum training or certification for that guide. A Sherpa on his second season with no formal qualification meets the standard. The regulation exists. It is effectively toothless. GPS trackers became mandatory on the mountain, which sounded like progress. Trackers generate data. Data can show exactly where a climber is and when. What Nepal has no mechanism to do is use that data in real time to enforce a descent decision. The tracker records where you went. Nobody is watching the feed to tell you to turn around. The rule exists without operational consequence. A 7,000-meter prerequisite for Everest permits was introduced in 2025, requiring climbers to demonstrate prior high-altitude experience before attempting the mountain. A version of this rule was tried before, in the mid-1990s, and reversed under industry pressure when permit numbers dropped. The financial incentive to keep issuing permits runs directly against the enforcement of experience requirements. When those two interests conflict, the permit revenue has won before. Permit caps are the most direct solution to the 2019 traffic jam problem. Nepal has declined to implement them. The government that called overcrowding claims Baseless collected $4.2 million in permit revenue from the season those deaths occurred. The entity with formal power to regulate the volume of climbers has a structural reason not to use it. What the best operators actually do is worth naming, because it demonstrates the problem is solvable at the individual level. Alpine Ascents, adventure consultants under Guy Cotter, and Alpenglow under Adrian Ballinger have built internal cultures where guides are expected to make turnaround calls and are supported when they do. Pre-expedition briefings explicitly frame a non-summit as a legitimate outcome. Ballinger eventually moved his entire Everest operation to the Tibet side specifically to escape Nepal's overcrowding. That is a premium operator conclusion, not a scalable industry one. The tension that cannot be resolved without changing the business model is this. A guide company genuinely committed to turning clients back will, across enough seasons, have a lower summit success rate than one that isn't. Premium operators can absorb that and compete on safety culture, experience, and guide ratios. Budget operators cannot absorb it. Their entire value proposition is delivering the summit at lower cost. And lower cost means lower margin, which means less investment in the guide authority and expedition structure that makes turnarounds possible. As long as that remains true, the system will keep producing the same outcome. Nobody in this system has both the power and the incentive to say no. Not the client who spent $100,000 to be here. Not the guide whose next season depends on this one. Not the operator whose marketing lives and dies on the success rate. Not the government collecting $11,000 a permit with no one above base camp. The mountain doesn't negotiate with the business model. It never has. If you want more forensic breakdowns of the systems that make mountaineering deadly, subscribe and hit the bell. The next one is already waiting.